Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce, and the good man that we all know as the great Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain. So this is a co-stream, I presume, Jonathan.
It is. We should be live on my channel. I always get paranoid with these things about whether it's actually working or not. But let's check and see if my lovely audience can see this too.
So we have quite a lot to talk about today already, because I say already, like I've just realized a massive bit of news. You just told me a massive bit of news, actually, that I wasn't aware of, that I've just had to change the thumbnail over because it's huge. So we've got quite a bit to talk about. I have a cup of tea ready to go. It's in my Ukraine flag tea mug. I have a NAFO mug that's now my new favorite mug. It's available at all good merch URLs below in the description below. But a little anecdote before we go to the doom and gloom about the state of the world, mate. I've got twin 14-year-old boys. One of them's on the spectrum. He's very, very interesting, very challenging in very many ways. The other week, he started drinking tea. He asked me to go make a cup of tea. I don't know whether he'd been at a friend's house and you're like, oh, they drink tea. Why don't I? I've been trying to get my boys to drink tea for ages because I drink so much of it.
They're not going to listen to you, though. They're only going to do it if somebody else.
That's it. Oh, well, why did you eat those baked beans tonight? Like those are Heinz baked beans that I'm always trying to feed you. Like, why? Oh, because I had them on my friend's house. Oh, right. Like they're not good enough for me, but you'll eat them at someone else's house, right? Okay. But yeah, so one of my boys is very interesting, and he's now like starting to drink tea, and I'm like, do you know there is hope for the universe? If Oscar's drinking tea, and I saw him like creep upstairs last night with my NAFO mug, with a cup of tea. I'm like, do you know what? You take my NAFO mug, mate. You go for it because you're drinking tea. So the world is already a better place.
Swings and roundabouts, isn't it? 3 steps forward, 2 steps back.
Yep. Often 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, which is what's going on with Ukraine maybe at the moment.
It is. Now, I think when we plotted out worst case scenarios, people get very hot under the collar, when you start talking about Donald Trump as, is he a Russian asset? Isn't he? Blah, blah, blah. But when you look at the things he's done, the decisions he's taken, not just getting distracted by the words he utters, the word sounds he utters, but when you look at what he's actually done, he's not done anything to favor Ukraine, not consciously and not directly. The minerals deal there's really little in there to favor Ukraine in the short term. There's little in that deal that actually gives Ukraine any more agency in their war, any more material in their war. Whatever benefits accrue, they're extremely long term. So he's physically done nothing to support Ukraine, but he's done plenty of things indirectly to help Russia, and a few things directly help Russia, including this news that's come around earlier in the week that he has removed some key Russian banks from the sanctions list. And that's going to help in all sorts of ways to alleviate some of the pressure on Putin. And today we see that, maybe not unexpectedly, but all military support from Ukraine is being withdrawn, including air defense systems. And this isn't just
I don't know.
new stuff.
Is it all, or is it just those particular ones?
Everything. It's full stop. I mean, as far as I can tell, there's a whole list of stuff. So there's artillery shells, 155 shells. There's Patriot munitions. There's Gimlers, all that kind of stuff. So it's stuff that's going to make a real difference. Now, there may be, some other bits and bobs that haven't yet been curtailed, but there's no new aid packages. And what they're doing now is knocking on the head some serious packages that have been pre-agreed, and they'd already blocked 20,000, air defense components just before it all kicked off against Iran. Now, of course, Colby, the guy who's done this,
Colby Elbridge,
he has a track record of this. He's very much on the so-called realist side. I happen to think the realists are slightly more aligned with Russia than just on a theoretical level.
Yeah, agreed.
But he says, we need to build our stockpiles, we need to preserve these munitions in the US, and we need to build our own deterrence, and blah, 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 blah. It's very much the kind of appeasing, cautious stuff we heard from the German chancellor, excuses of why, Scholz didn't want to, give Taurus and all this kind of stuff. So there's plenty of excuses that the manager.
Although that he said yesterday,
that
he did say yesterday they are back on.
Oh, that's Merz, yes, but Scholz. Yeah. I mean, Scholz came up with every excuse in the book not to do it. And on paper, some of these excuses can seem quite plausible. But when you pull all these actions together, they ladder up to something more than just sort of tactical. They ladder up to a strategy. The strategy, I would argue, and we'll, if you can describe the Korean thing in a minute, the strategy, I think, has been clear all along, which is, I want a deal that benefits me, Mr. Trump. If I don't get that deal, I'm going to find a way to achieve that deal. This has never been about beating Russia, so you get a deal on Ukraine's terms, because whether he's a Russian asset or not actually doesn't matter at this point. He believes Russia cannot be defeated. If you believe Russia cannot be defeated, then the only way to get a deal is to weaken and pressure Ukraine so that they capitulate. And I think the capitulation of Ukraine has been the strategy all along. We are now seeing some of that picture filled in. We're seeing the actions that ladder up to the strategy of forcing Ukraine to either capitulate or to be erased. So people might, balk at this. The US is aligning with Russia to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, either to force a capitulation or enable Russia to erase Ukraine. That is what's happening, and people need to get their fucking heads out of the sand already.
I believe you're pretty angry, and justifiably so. So this morning I did my normal video, my hits and losses video, and I had a rant at the end, and I said I'm going to have a rant, and it's not performative. Like, I'm not like, I'm going to have one, it's coming, and now I'm going to put it on for the audience. Like, I just know that I'm going to get angry because I'm actually really freaking angry, like, which is annoying because obviously I don't want to be angry, and the US should be doing what I think they should be doing. But it's annoying because actually I've been in a fairly good place for much of the rest of this last week. But I just, when he put the litany of either inaction or negative actions that, and again, sorry to just always be picking on the Trump administration. It's not America, it's not Americans, it's the Trump administration and the people that they have in these positions. But they are making the decisions, and the reason why it's so freaking important is because the US spends more on defense than next 12 nations combined, etc., and they have a huge stockpiles, and they kind of, what they say matters, and we all follow suit really with the US. And if the US are backing the other horse at the moment, then it's all really rather depressing. And when you have Trump saying almost the right things at the NATO summit, and we talked about this, and it's just like that, I was like, yeah, this is looking somewhat good. And then he goes back, and like I've said before, it's not Trump that's the problem. I think it's the people around Trump, but he just becomes a mouthpiece for them because he can't independently think, because he has no background knowledge about all of these matters. So if Elbridge Colby and Stephen Miller, and I don't know, even Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson and JD Vance, all these people are feeding into Trump's head like, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. What's the litany? Let's go through it. No aid since January, like none. Sanctions being alleviated, including sanctions on Gazprom Bank and Sberbank and others this week with regard to Rosatom's activities in Europe. We've got not putting on extra sanctions on the shadow fleet in the same way that Europe, Canada, and UK and Australia even are. We have calling Zelensky dictator and ambushing him in the Oval Office. We've got the trying to extort, the extortion of the minerals deal. We've got just everything that the Trump administration does, and then fawning over Putin, not holding him to account, never saying a critical word about Putin. And when Putin does do something horrific, say something mealy-mouthed about it, something really not good enough about Putin, but then other sides it by slagging off Ukraine. Just all of this builds up a picture that you guys are definitely on the wrong side here. You guys are definitely backing the Russians, and prove me otherwise. So sorry to finish this rant off this morning, because I have a couple of commenters. I get emailed by someone that emails me virtually every day to slag me off for my Trump derangement syndrome and to say Trump is so amazing and the Trump administration is amazing, but also Slava Ukraini. So he ends off every email. He's a real supporter of Ukraine, but thinks that Trump is the bee's knees. And I have this guy on my threads, and yes, that often just can't understand how I could be critical of Trump. And I'm like, guys, come on a live stream, come and debate me on this, right? I don't think you can stand on one leg when it comes to defending Trump and defending Ukraine. Those two things are incompatible. It is not happening. Trump is not supporting Ukraine. Trump is supporting Russia. And even if he does eventually get to support Russia, it's after the death of many Ukrainians that he has brought about by not supporting Ukraine in the 5, 6, 7 months before he actually might do something decent. Anyway.
He already has brought about the deaths of thousands of Ukrainians already. This has already happened when he blocked for his own political purposes, when he blocked the aid programs under the Democrats. And of course, they were particularly politically inept by forcing the Speaker of the House out and triggering this political crisis. There are many ways in which it could be handled in a less partisan fashion so that Trump wasn't able to exert the kind of leverage he did, but he was able to. Dreadful political sort of process, extremely sort of partisan, that happened. And then aid was blocked to Ukraine for 6 months technically, but really 8 months, because it takes a while for those supply chains to get going again. In that period, thousands of Ukrainian servicemen, brave souls fighting for Ukraine's freedom, died, and perhaps they would not have died if properly supplied with the munitions that would have come. So Trump has already killed thousands of Ukrainians. That has already happened. Since he's been in office the second time, there were aid packages in place that meant that, yes, he withdrew intelligence materials for a while. That certainly may have disadvantaged Ukraine to some degree. There's a debate about whether it did or whether it, whether they lost Kursk because of that, whether there are other factors. But essentially, what he's doing now in blocking air defense systems at the same time as Russia is dramatically scaling up their ability to send Shaheeds and other projectiles into Ukrainian cities. I mean, there's a dramatic ramping up of this. At the same time, you have a withdrawal of US support for air defense systems. There is a direct correlation here. Hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, will die. And people say, well, what's the strategy? You're not going to break the Ukrainian will. What they want to do, and a very strong Ukrainian voice was explaining this. It was Orisa Lutsevich of Chatham House explaining this. The strategy is not just sheer brutality for the sake of it, although, let's not put that past the Russians. It's to force Ukrainian civilian population to abandon their cities, abandon their economy, force the women and children to leave the country and slowly denude it of people, life, and the economic power that is essential for its resistance. That's what they're trying to do. And here's the graphic. It's scaling up. Now, we talked about the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario that we discussed over the last year or 2 years was that the US under Trump might align against Ukraine and with Russian interests. That's happening. We also talked when Koreans were sent in to Kursk that 10,000 is not a serious number. It's very serious that North Korea is involved, but 10,000 is not a serious number when you look at the sort of numbers of casualties week in, week out that are occurring. So we said, look, this is just the start. This is just the foot soldiers, a taster menu of what's to come. And unfortunately, people have not taken that seriously. I estimated that you could see as many as 10,000 Korean soldiers in Ukraine within the next sort of 1 to 2 years. And now we see this figure of 30,000. So we're getting closer to that number. Again, 30,000 isn't the final thing. So people freaking out about this isn't it. North Korea has hundreds of thousands of soldiers under arms. The worst case scenario is that Trump abandons Europe and that Russia, combined with North Korea, send a physical army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers into Europe. And we have to face that. We have to prepare for that eventuality.
So this is an intelligence assessment from Ukrainian officials. North Korea is set to triple the number of its troops fighting for Russia along the front lines with Ukraine, sending an additional 25 to 30,000 soldiers to assist Moscow. The troops may arrive in Russia in the coming months, according to the assessment seen by CNN, adding to the 11,000 sent in November, who helped repel Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region. Around 4,000 of those North Korean troops were killed or injured in the deployment, according to Western officials. Yet Pyongyang's cooperation with Moscow has since bloomed. If this is true, and it seems thoroughly plausible to me, then this is absolutely terrible for Ukraine. Those 10,000, which actually became, I think, 14,000 odd in the end, were bad enough. Actually, I know you kind of were dismissive of that in the whole scheme of things, but actually, that was a serious issue that caused Russia to be able to take back Kursk eventually.
Yes.
Without those 14,000, and you had the US stopping aid for 7 weeks or however long it was, because I forget. No, it wasn't that long. But Pete Hegseth apparently misinterpreted what Trump said and just cut aid off, and intelligence sharing. So that, together with North Koreans coming into Kursk, and actually an adaptation of the Russian tactics with their Rubicon drone unit, all these things conspired to losing Kursk. And these North Koreans are going to be more able as time goes on. They are human beings with guns, with weapons that are aimed at the Ukrainians, and Ukrainians will have to deal with them or die. This is,
and they're
attritional.
Learning. This is the key thing as well. They are learning all the time from being, from having fairly inaccurate, unreliable artillery, very inaccurate missiles. Russian engineers in their thousands are now helping to retool North Korea so that their production and accuracy and sophistication is far higher, as well as, rumored to be helping the nuclear program, as they were with Iran. And the quid pro quo here is that not only do they provide more meat for the Russian machine, but North Korea quite explicitly wants to learn how to fight a modern war. And I wouldn't put it past them to learn those lessons quite effectively. So yes, 10,000 was never going to, have a huge, overwhelming strategic impact, but it did help them retake Kursk. 30,000 is serious. But again, we need to see this as possibly, if 10,000 was like 1% of what can be provided, this could still be a small percentage of the overall possibility of the scale that North Korea eventually gets sort of sucked in. I say sucked in, they're almost certainly quite willing. In fact, I would imagine Kim Jong-un loves the idea of a North Korean army sweeping through Europe.
So at the beginning of the war, I wrote an article, and even in my early videos, saying, look, Russia cannot win this war. And I still broadly believe that in terms of the maximalist definition of win, right? They can't take all of Ukraine. And that was perfectly evident within 3 days of the war. So they had to readjust. They were expecting not to have a war. I keep saying this. It was a special military operation. It literally was at the beginning. They went in expecting to just turn over the government, and then with their parade uniforms, do some parades around, clear up the mess after 15 days. Job done. Thank you very much. Then it was very clear that the Ukrainians didn't want them there. So it turned into war. And as it turned into war that they weren't prepared for, it was clear that they weren't going to be able to take all of Ukraine. Okay, so they can't win the war, but what they can do is make Ukraine not win it either. And so it just becomes kind of somewhere in the middle where everyone loses to some degree, but Russia will gain territory, and so on and so forth. Now, my caveat was the only way that Russia can prevail properly in this war is if China fully comes on side, right? But what I didn't anticipate is that North Korea could come on side. Just wasn't even thinking North Korea, right? So we're at a stage where North Korea could make, if what you are saying might happen, this kind of maximalist support from North Korea to Russia, we do have a situation where Russia might prevail, or certainly far more than we had otherwise anticipated, with a massive North Korean input in the place of a Chinese huge supportive effort. Although China can then continue to support on the sidelines and do this other stuff, but North Korea, they are a massive freaking challenge.
Yeah. And of course, China can still pretend to have that position of supposed neutrality. But we have to accept, I mean, China experts will say that, okay, China doesn't have full control over North Korea. And there's a certain amount of, I would say, agency there with the dictator of North Korea. But if China categorically disagreed with something that North Korea was doing, they have ways of exerting pressure and preventing it. So again, China's playing an interesting game here, where it is certainly tolerating, and maybe far more than tolerating, this unfolding, and it may well suit their purposes to dramatically weaken Europe, using North Korea as a kind of proxy, or allowing North Korea to, off the leash, as it were. Certainly, global chaos is what Russia is perfectly happy to achieve. Now, China doesn't want global chaos, but it does want the world realigned in its interests, and it certainly doesn't want to have any peer competitors. So the erosion of the international rules-based order, the erosion of American hegemony and power, the weakening of Europe, these are all things that China may well see as beneficial to its long-term interests, even though it is not, an out-and-out arsonist in the way that Russia is when it comes to international order.
So moving on from the 30,000 up to 30,000 North Koreans who could be on the way to Russia, which is an absolute, shocker. We have, of course, what you've already talked about, the aid to Ukraine being halted. This is, just to remind people, pre-organized, pre-arranged, pre-financed through the Presidential Drawdown Authority and USAI funding. So both stockpiles that the Americans have and orders to their defense industry. It is a halting of both of these, which is absolutely terrible. Now, Zelensky did everything Trump asked him to do, signed away mineral rights, agreed to an unconditional ceasefire, and the US still cut off previously funded weapons supplies, leaving Ukrainian cities defenseless against Russian missile strikes. A lesson to all here. And I showed you this already. So that is a graph showing the sheer volume of strikes by Shahid drones, but you've also got ballistic missiles as well, and these Patriot PAC-3 interceptors are the ones that are being stopped. These are for ballistic missile strikes. We have 1 week after Trump said publicly that he was going to look for more Patriots for Ukraine. They've stopped the Patriots they had already funded, so that it is just like completely against what Trump had even said. This is interesting from Podolyak, the Ukrainian here, saying US warehouses have enough air defense systems and missiles for them. Negotiations on their supply to Ukraine, including on a commercial basis, are continuing. But also, we've heard from the Ukrainians that they've heard nothing formally about the Americans stopping this. So it's just happening without letting the people know that are receiving them. Phillips O'Brien, the war historian, says, so it turns out the US was not really thinking of sending more anti-air weapons to Ukraine. It was planning on stopping what little was on its way. The US is cutting off Ukraine during this vital moment. Once again, flattering Trump is not the right strategy. There we are. So and it's all down to Elbridge Colby, who is the deputy for defense for policy, and he is pulling a lot of the strings. As you say, he's a realist. I would say he's a little more, as you kind of are inclined to think as well, he's a little more aligned to Russia than I'm comfortable with. There's just plenty of
insinuation that might be the case.
Yeah, and that's long been thought. I mean, I was not happy with Elbridge Colby before the Trump inauguration and like his views on Ukraine. And there's nothing that he's done or said that is going to change that analysis. So yeah, it's not looking good. Okay, if we move on to other geopolitical items, Europe is close to adopting the 18th package of sanctions against Russia. So Zelensky is a bit more upbeat about Europe and more precisely Hungary and Slovakia coming round to the 18th package. It's going to be discussed, I think, after July the 3rd, because they have discussed it previously. It didn't get through, and they're waiting for a couple of days.
What do they have to do there, Jonathan? Because previously, to get these guys on board, they are almost certainly not out and out agents of the Russian state, but they certainly align their decisions and much of what they say with Russian interests. One could say Kremlin friendly, but they have shown to be, let's say, their weakness is having large dollops of cash thrown at them to bolster their regimes from the European Commission. So how are they going to be brought on side?
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the only option, really, unless you're going to invoke Article 11, is it? Or Article 7, I can't remember. Where you try and... The problem with the EU is they've got all of these hoops you've got to jump through to join the EU. But if you start backsliding on those ideals that you achieved in order to get into the EU, there's not a lot the EU can do. And in fact, kicking you out of the EU, that wasn't really... thought about proactively by the EU, so they don't have too many mechanisms for correction. And of course, it's the idea is it's a democratic alliance, and so these people are exerting their democratic rights. Okay, but then if you need unanimity in order to make a vote, then you've got a real problem. That's a democratic issue. So I think there needs to be a change, and which they are looking at, a change to the rules whereby you can have like a supermajority, not unanimity, because unanimity just means that you're very rarely going to achieve, especially in these times of need where you have to get things done quickly. It's going to be very difficult, and that's what they're finding. So Slovakia have previously been on board with sanctions packages, but they're holding out on this one, and it's a lot to do with the hydrocarbons exports from Russia because they depend on them, so they want to carve out a bit of an exemption there. So there might be something they can do with that, but really, I would say there needs to be some holding back of funding, which is what they've historically done. Kaja Kallas did say that there is a pathway B and a pathway C here. So they apparently do have options, but I guess they just don't want to go down that route because it might mean reforming the rules or doing things that really isolate those countries. I don't know.
Carrot and stick then. It's the implication of threat, but with some big carrots dangled in front of them as well. Maybe this is one for another one, but the frozen Russian assets as well. I mean, that apparently was also coming up and would need to be rolled over in July. This has kind of gone quiet. So is there a risk of the frozen Russian assets ceding back to Russia, or will they be rolled over and not used properly? Because we've started to hear for actually the first time, again, it's Merz, with strong words, see if the actions follow. For the first time has indicated that Germany may be open to those assets being used in the defense of Ukraine, not simply remaining sort of frozen.
Yeah, I've never really come heavily down on one side or the other of this. I understand, obviously, that $300 billion would be very useful for Ukraine, but I assume it's not just going to be liquid cash. So there's going to be issues of like converting that into cash and getting that to Ukraine. But then once it's gone, it's gone. And there is some, I do like the idea of there's a sustainability of loaning and underwriting those loans to Ukraine with those frozen Russian assets, because that can just keep going on and keep going on. So although it's not 300 billion, it's like maybe 50 billion a year, and I think that gets around the legal issues and the problems that they foresee with regard to it's going to be counterproductive for stimulating investment in Europe, because people are going to be afraid to invest in case Europe just decides it's going to, freeze your assets and whatnot. So I understand the arguments for and against.
That's the lawyers and bean counters argument, but I'm not sure it holds an awful lot of water, given there are very few places in the world to invest, and Europe still is probably one of, if not the most stable sort of rule of law environment. It's like, where are you going to go? I mean, you can make this argument, they'll go somewhere else. Where are you going to go? It kind of falls apart. But I get the idea of the sustainability. That's one I haven't heard before, and I do actually appreciate that. If we accept Ukraine will never fall, then actually that starts to make sense, because you've got this amazing, injection year after year that could help with rebuilding and so on. At the moment, though, there's no point in thinking about rebuilding when there is an existential threat to the very existence of Ukraine. I think that's the key argument, to say, look, do something more with the 300 billion. And I would follow the path of Denmark, which is invest in the Ukrainian defense industry, because, and have all sorts of transparency and whatever's in there, and make sure that the investment has benchmarking metrics against success benchmarks and all these kind of things. But it has been demonstrated the most effective thing you can do per euro of investment is actually help the Ukrainian defense industry. And indeed, talking to Dimko, which that's my interview going live tonight, the Ukrainian defense industry, even if you don't look at all the new capacity or the new things it could be doing, its existing capacity to build artillery pieces, armored vehicles, shells, etc. At the moment, it is something in the region of 50 to 60% unutilized capacity of those production lines that already exist. So an injection of that funding could have,
and that is happening, and they're also doing co-production. So they're even taking, now we've got to the stage where Denmark's doing this as well. So they're taking and
but there's not enough money, Jonathan. There's not enough money, right? The production facilities are there, and they could be producing 60% more tomorrow if they had the funds. The funds aren't there.
But this is where it comes down to nations saying, well, you've only got a finite amount of money, and we know it's going to get more bang for your buck if we invest it directly in Ukraine. But of course, our taxpayers aren't going to see the benefits of that. Well, they will in some kind of geopolitical strategizing, but in kind of tangible benefits, we need to be investing back in our economy. So I think Denmark have realized that. So they started off investing directly in Ukraine, and they're still doing that, but they're also bringing production of Ukrainian equipment. It's interesting. So it's this localization. So they talk about localizing in Ukraine. So making Rheinmetall making this, and BAE Systems making L117 howitzers or whatever in Ukraine. Okay, brilliant. That's investment into Ukraine. But also we're starting to see Denmark take drone production, UK take drone production of Ukrainian drones back to Denmark and UK, so that you're generating jobs. You might not get as much bang for your buck. It's going to be more expensive employment, so on and so forth. And the no doubt the supply chain is going to be more expensive, but then you get the benefit of creating jobs, and your taxpayers, who are your voters, are going to be
now there's a problem
happy with that.
There might be a problem with that as well. And this really comes through strongly the interview with Dimka. So I absolutely get that, right? You take your money that we're helping Ukraine, and you help yourself at the same time. There is a country right now, very pro-Ukrainian one. It's not Denmark, fortunately. There is a pro-Ukraine country that Dimka didn't name the country, but he talks about this as being a real problem. They're taking a lot of money and investing in drone production. They don't want to enable Ukrainian industry, but they do want to do something for Ukraine, and they want to help themselves in the way you've described. So they're producing some fairly expensive drones, and then they're shipping them en masse to Ukraine. These drones are built very much like iPhones, in that you can't really go in and take them apart. You can't swap components out. You can't change the frequencies, which you need to do with quite a fast iteration level to keep up with electronic warfare. So this country is pumping these things out, helping themselves, telling their electorates that they're helping Ukraine. These drones cost about 10 times more than the Ukrainian equivalent, and they're useless. They're useless. They cannot be used. They're utterly ineffective.
I wonder whether that's Germany. I know Germany are building a lot of drones for Ukraine. But I mean, there
It's
will be
delusional.
problems.
It's not focused on an outcome
it's
or an
not
objective.
delusional. Yeah, that's delusional, but it doesn't need to be delusional. So, you know, it's do that, but don't do exactly that. You know, help you. You know, it just needs to be done sensibly. It's not saying, well, therefore you can't do that at all. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like co-production needs to take place in both nations, and it just needs to take place sensibly in a way that these things can be adapted. Make whatever you like, send it to Ukraine, but allow them to tinker with it, because they're the ones using this crap on the front line. And there also needs to be co-production of infantry fighting vehicles. I know Rheinmetall were talking about building the Lynx in Ukraine. I don't know what's happened with that. That doesn't seem to have materialized. That they need because they've got infantry mobility vehicles that they're making, quite a range of them actually in Ukraine. And in fact, one of them's being localized back to Spain. So Spain are making a Ukrainian vehicle. So that's that co-production thing going on. But there needs to be some of the larger items like tanks. I mean, we can dismiss tanks, but they are still useful. They're still needed. And it would be useful if they could produce their own, you know, just keep some low numbers of tanks coming online that are half decent, and same with infantry fighting vehicles. And that production at the moment is missing. But yeah. Okay. So going back to where we were, I know that there are some misunderstandings with official Budapest, says Zelensky in here. For our part, we appeal to Germany as to the strong leaders of Europe regarding your dialogue with Hungary. In other words, yeah, sort out Hungary, please. As of July the 1st, Denmark has assumed the presidency of the Council of the European Union. Over the next 6 months, the country will focus on strengthening EU security, supporting Ukraine, and developing the European defense industry. That's really good news, that rotating. I think presidency has gone from Poland to Denmark, and that's super important because Denmark are incredible supporters of Ukraine. Zelensky said today, this is the other night, today there were many different preparatory meetings. We are preparing for meetings in Europe, in particular in Denmark, and also with our other partners. Among the main issues will be the production of weapons, our joint investments and joint products. It's all about these joint co-productions. We have clear information and partners confirm this, and this is super important, that sanctions are really painful for Russia. So it's the idea that actually sanctions do work, they are working, Russia is hurting, and it's at this time that the US appears to be wanting to alleviate the sanctions, and it's at this time that they need to be the pressure needs to be piled on even more. So, and if the pressure is increased further, says Zelensky himself, it will encourage Russia to really think about something else besides the front and hatred of its neighbors. That is absolutely true. So that is happening. We have Germany now officially supports Ukraine's NATO membership. This is a big turnaround, Jonathan. So Germany was one of the nations with the US that was like, yeah, not really sure about NATO membership. Friedrich Merz has come along, and I think he's much more bullish about Ukraine. You know, he's a different leader to Scholz now. I'm not going to be talking about domestic German politics here. But in terms of Ukraine, he's certainly sounding a lot stronger. So he's now saying that we support NATO membership for Ukraine. Zelensky stated, we value Germany's clear signal. Ukraine's future is in NATO. It's important that all partners share this vision. We thank the Chancellor, his team, and the German people for their support and leadership in Europe. That is really good news. We have Poland's Orlen, which is a petrol company, has officially ended all purchases of Russian oil, including for its Czech refinery in Litvinov. CEO Ireneusz Fafara declared, quote, we freed Central Europe from Russian oil today. The Czech Republic is now fully independent of Russian crude for the first time in history. That's excellent news, although we must be wary of the new the Czech elections this year that are likely to bring in a right-wing populist government that are not going to be favorable to Ukraine. That is a big problem because the Czech initiative is providing an awful lot of artillery ammunition for Ukraine through Czechia. So we hear that Putin and Macron had a phone call yesterday, the first one in about 3 years, according to the Kremlin. They discussed the situation in the Middle East, special responsibility France and Russia have as permanent members of the UN Security Council for maintaining peace and security, including the Middle East region and the maintenance of the global regime on nuclear non-proliferation. Putin reminded that the Ukrainian conflict is the direct consequence of the Western states' policy that have ignored Russia's security interests for years and now want to prolong the fighting by giving modern weapons to the Kyiv regime. So just spouting the normal Kremlin bollocks, really. So what do you make of this phone call with Macron? We've got French aid to Ukraine saying, regarding Ukraine, the French president emphasized France's unwavering support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He called for a ceasefire and established as soon as possible, and for negotiations to begin between Ukraine and Russia to find solid and lasting solution to the conflict. The two presidents will continue to discuss this issue. Any thoughts on that?
I think Merz had it right. Merz came out and said, and I put it in my episode yesterday, that I will not be talking to Putin because every conversation with Putin is followed by a horrific attack by Russia on Ukraine.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that. And this is the only thing. There should be no normalization of Putin, his regime. There should be no conversation until he comes begging with a whole raft of concessions. But he's not doing that. Even at the St. Petersburg Forum, where he's got his actual economist. And for people to say, oh, you're just spouting anti-Russian stuff, listen to what his actual economists were saying during the St. Petersburg Forum. They are freaking out because they are seeing their economy go down the pan. They can see that this is heading towards some significant crunch point. They are now waiting for bank collapses, business collapses. If you look, I don't know if you can get the graph up, there is a list of Russian indebtedness, property and private credit. It is on an exponential rise.
Yeah, I have shown that.
Default.
Yeah.
Absolutely extraordinary. They're heading for crunch, and everyone but Putin realizes that something's going to have to change because it is no longer sustainable to maintain a war at this level and this level of expenditure when there's very little, when you're running on fumes, basically. But Putin doesn't get it. He's still talking about Ukraine in terms of the erasure of Ukraine. That is still that is still the implication of everything he said at that conference. He was seeking investment in Russia, and during the Q&A that was supposed to be about that, he talked about any country or any territory where Russian boots have been belongs to Russia. Right? That's a great way to get investment, isn't it? Remember that Russian boots have been in all of Eastern Europe, Berlin, and if you go back to the Napoleonic Wars, they've been in Paris too. So yeah, I'm going to invest in your country.
Imperialism. It's rank imperialism.
It's genocidal imperialism. He's now deluded, obsessed. Where's Gerdes and Greg Terry? I'm sorry, we're poor substitutes for them, but we'll do a live stream.
God, you can't please everyone, can you?
Oh, Jesus. You got the two Jonathans, and when you freaking won,
Yes, I'm sure we'll have a chat with them at some point.
Don't speak to Putin while he's still pronouncing genocidal imperial guff. Don't give him the space. Don't give him the oxygen. Don't give him any credibility. Don't normalize his regime, and stop freaking waffling on about the rights and the wrongs and what you're going to do. Just do something. Do something to punch Putin's regime in the face. That is the only thing he'll listen to. It's the only thing he'll understand. The words are just taken as weakness and capitulation, and it seems Macron has not yet learned that.
Yeah. Good news that the UK and Germany are preparing to sign a wide-ranging treaty that includes a mutual assistance clause in the case of threat to either nation. So it's an Article 5 bilateral agreement between the UK and Germany. That's fascinating. This is our attempt to get closer to Europe, and we're doing it through defence. This is the sort of thing that Jonathan and myself will be pleased about because we're kind of generally pro-European Brits. We're on the Remainer side of things. So I think this is good news.
It's something Edward Lucas was talking about over the last 3 years when he was, going for candidacy in Westminster. He didn't win, unfortunately, but he was talking about defence being the route back into Europe. And here we go.
Yeah. So the document is expected to contain further measures on tackling illegal migration, transportation, and research and innovation. So that's good news there. We have new sanctions against Russia are currently in the final stages of negotiations with the Slovak government. A compromise will be reached, says Friedrich Merz again. So Germans seem to be hopeful that Slovakia might change their tune on sanctions on the 18th package, I presume that is. He also expressed confidence that soon American lawmakers will support Europe and new anti-Russian sanctions. Well, the problem with the bill from Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal that might well pass through the Senate, through Congress, is that unfortunately written within the bill is a waiver that allows Trump to unilaterally decide whether to enact it or not. So in other words, they can pass it through Congress, but it might not get anywhere further. But yeah, then there's this is fascinating. I don't know if you've heard about this, but Iran have claimed that they have 100 gigabytes of Trump administration emails, right? And they're threatening to release these Trump aides emails. So
that's fun.
If they do, I mean, this will make Hillary Clinton emails look like child's play.
Oh, the signal group scandal. That would be like kindergarten, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated with this. Like, I kind of want this to happen, but that's only because if it has utilitarian, if there's utility in this happening to bring about the US doing something more positive for Ukraine in some way, and if we get an insight into just what I've speculated is a pure insanity going on in the Trump administration, it maybe kick them into action, into being better in some kind of way. So or this could just bring about absolute chaos in the American government, or it might not be true, right? This could be the Iranians just messing around here. But if they do genuinely have 100 gigabytes of Trump aid emails, then that is phenomenal. So the US has sanctioned a company, an IT company called AZA Group, over ransomware operations. This will be more to do with cybersecurity in general rather than, I think, being anti-Russian. The US Treasury Department characterized AZA as a bulletproof hosting service that provided services to the Medusa and Luma info stealers, as well as the Bian Lian and Redline ransomware groups. So that's good news. Then we have the Russia-Azerbaijan situation intensifying. So I've reported on this. Baku was unhappy about Russian police killing 2 or maybe 5 ethnic Azeris, while the Kremlin protested very loudly about the arrest of 2 suspected FSB goons working for Sputnik. Then you have the leak of the air defense shooting down the Azerbaijan Airlines plane. So that has been confirmed as a genuine leak, and with a letter supposedly from the air defense commander showing that the Russians purposefully shot down the Azeri Airlines plane, which is insanely controversial, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, did they think it was a military target? What have we learned from the release?
No, I'm not 100% sure. Good question. But you put that alongside what I'm going to report here, and you have a very interesting melting pot in that region, Jonathan, where Azerbaijan and Armenia appear to both be distancing themselves very formally and very loudly from Russia. And some of the people in the Russian information spaces are going mental about this. So we have the Azerbaijani Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed surprise at the statement made by Russian presidential envoy Mikhail Shivkoy, who claimed that Azerbaijan's cultural landscape would be impoverished without Russian artists. To use his own words, we do not believe that the concerts by performers like Basta enrich the cultural palette of our country, said the Azerbaijani Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now, what's happening is Azerbaijan is basically phasing out Russian language, it appears, in Azerbaijan. So it's sort of similar thing that Ukraine has done, which is, the formal learning of the Russian language and the use of it as a kind of state-sanctioned language. It's not like you're banning Russian being spoken, which is what Russians will claim and certain propagandists will jump on, but you're phasing it out as a cultural influence. That's what Azerbaijan, and now we're hearing Armenia, are seeking to do. This is huge. Like Russia, like as much as we'll complain about Ukraine and the US, Russia is losing some real currency in this region, and I think it's significant. So here, Russian propagandists, so Solovyev and others, have been going a bit crazy about this, received instructions to threaten Azerbaijan. Propagandists Marsan and Solovyev. Marsan's a horrible guy. He's the one that said some really despicable things earlier on in the war. Started to scare Azerbaijan with economic losses. They said that Russia is the third largest trading partner, and if anything happens, the situation could change dramatically. Solovyev also added that Russia and Azerbaijan share a 300-kilometer border, frightening Baku with the possibility of war. Lower-level Russian propagandists are threatening Azerbaijan with missile strikes and call the people of Azerbaijan Nazis. It is so... It's like history repeating itself, isn't it? It's just incredible.
It's anyone we don't like, anyone who disagrees with us in any way, Nazi. It's beyond pathetic, but.
And Zelensky did some superb trolling. So yeah, I said last night, I had a conversation with the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev. I thanked him for his support for Ukraine, our people, and our territorial integrity. Also expressed our clear support from Ukraine in a situation where Russia is bullying Azerbaijani citizens. Expressed our condolences to Azerbaijan in connection with the murder of the Safarov brothers on Russian territory. We also discussed our bilateral relations, energy, and cooperation in the humanitarian sphere. Trolling, you can call it trolling, but that's just good statescraft there, where he is taking, he's being opportunistic with regard to what is going on in Azerbaijan and driving that wedge between the two countries. I think that's well played. And then we hear that the Speaker of Armenia's National Assembly, Alen Simonyan, stated that Yerevan, so the capital, should seriously begin working on suspending the broadcast of Russian TV channels. According to him, quote, the appearances of degenerate TV hosts and brainwashed individuals are causing serious harm to Armenian-Russian relations. These brainwashed monkeys and their shows have long been banned in our country, just like their entry into Armenia. But if their state channels allow themselves to interfere in Armenia's internal affairs, we may respond in kind by restricting their access to our citizens' homes. Absolutely, 100% go for it, is what I say. So yeah, you've got serious divisions here between Azerbaijan and Armenia, who are both not particularly friendly with each other, although it appears that there could well be a political agreement between these two nations and I think maybe Turkey. So that's good news, and it could be that hey, nothing like having a common enemy. So if Russia becomes the bad guys, it can actually unite these two countries in ways that otherwise wouldn't have been possible.
This underlines, or really it counters, Russia's claim to somehow be a balancing force in its own neighborhood. No, Russia fosters conflicts and supports various sides to divide and conquer and dominate territories. So this shows what happens when Russia power and influence wanes and weakens. Well, countries have to find their own path. And I think we've made this case over and over that Russia is an agent of chaos. It's an agent of distrust. It's an agent of division. And where it directly intervenes militarily, it's an agent of absolute death and misery. If you can get Russia out of the world's conflicts, then a miracle will happen. Many of them will dry up and be resolved, I think people will find.
Yeah, and interesting that Harry B mentions Kazakhstan has signed some kind of agreement with the UK. I think, don't know what for trade. No, so what happened is we signed a military agreement with Kazakhstan. It's not huge. It's relatively, it's the sort of thing that is very clever for the UK to do, which is do some kind of £50 million deal type thing with Kazakhstan, whereby they send military people over to our Sandhurst or wherever to do like English learning and military learning and tactics, but basically anglicizing, I guess, some of their military hierarchy. But it's that kind of soft power thing that gets Kazakhstan slightly more on side with you rather than China or Russia. And so that's something that we signed recently. But yeah, Kazakhstan, as it says, they provide Russia with most of their gunpowder, or rather they did. I mean, these countries are going to have very close trading relationships, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Kazakhstan with Russia. they are geographically right next to each other. It's only natural that's going to happen. So when Soloviev and Marsan threaten Azerbaijan because they have a 300-kilometer border and a third of their trade is done with Russia, that's the real situation. So what we are going to be doing as a Western nation, France has been doing this with Armenia, getting in with Armenia and selling weapons to them. Is this is just pulling them ever so slightly away from the Russian sphere of influence, which is really, really important to do. The last thing I have for us is this one. Before we do just a little bit of general chit chat. So an article by Ferran Barber in El Mundo about how Russian propaganda is spread in Spain. So there is a big diaspora community of Russians in Spain, and that is a challenge. If you remember the Russian helicopter pilot that defected, he moved to Spain and he was shot and he was killed in Spain because he moved to a country where there's a big Russian diaspora population, and it's very easy to kill him. The dissemination is carried out by so-called Russian houses and many Russian language schools. So when places like Armenia and Ukraine and Azerbaijan are saying we want to phase out the Russian language, things like Russian schools, that's because these are also hotbeds of Russian information warfare and Russian propaganda. It's not that, oh, God, Russia's bad, we're going to punish you by making your language illegal. It's no, this is a very important step into trying to halt the cultural and informational invasion of Russia into any given country.
And weakening it. Everything is used as a weapon. That includes culture and sport as well. Until we realize that Russia is prepared to weaponize everything, then we're going to carry on losing.
Yeah, and indeed, as it says here, these are people originally from Russia, but now they hold Spanish passports, and that's a problem. Russia played the long game, and they're so good at it. We hear about these spy cells that are, when they eventually are found out, and many won't be, of course, but there's one in Greece, there was one in Argentina, Brazil, I think Portugal. We have ones where they're like 10 years in the making. So they get a couple that go out there, they're married, they go out there, they live their lives doing some kind of business in the community, making all these contacts, building up this kind of fake life, but it's actually a real life to all intents and purposes. And then 10 years later, these sleeper cells then come alive, and that's when they start doing their thing. And it's just so clever, but they play the long game. They really do, the Russians, and need to be very wary of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I thought we could react to a few things that people have said. If you don't mind, Jonathan, is that right?
Let's do that. Let's do the general call to the fundraisers that we've got before we sort of jump into thank yous. People find in the description of my video here, we've got a fundraiser for Car for Ukraine. It seems to me, I think your channel's different because you're able to drop these in with frequency, but it's difficult for me to drop these into interviews. So the only time where my fundraisers really get any traction is when I'm doing live streams like this one. So I thought I'd mention that. Do help get the 4x4 vehicles that are so important.
Yeah, we've just passed it today. So actually, this is, for me, congratulations to my awesome team who have got us over the line for that vehicle. So thank you so much to people who've done that. Silicon Curtain here, as you can see, has at the moment almost 1,600 euros of the 11,000
target.
Yeah, but if anyone can help out with Jonathan's, you can get on his donor wall and help out there. But so thank you very much to my team, and good luck to the Silicon Curtainites, or whatever it is that they are indeed labeled.
Who knows? Someone there. Suggestions in the comments, please.
Yeah.
Siliconites, whatever. I don't know. That sounds a bit like a breast implant, doesn't it?
I don't know. I wouldn't mind being one. Okay, so so there we have some patches that you can get hold of, some pins and whatnot. Lots of great stuff. So really, Car for Ukraine, we both personally know, having been to Ukraine and literally delivered cars to Ukraine for them, we personally know that these guys are absolute legends and they do a really, really good job. and I'm thinking about getting back out there to drive another couple of vehicles, or at some point.
When?
Well,
when,
I
Mr.
don't know.
Pierce?
I don't know. I want to do it when it's not freaking middle of winter, because I keep going to Ukraine in the middle of winter. But I'm going on a summer holiday, and so I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage summer.
You're not free on, say, the 17th of July?
See, I technically am, but it's the end of the school holidays and get ready to go on my own holiday.
True,
but the problem I have, Jonathan, is if there was an airport in Ukraine, I would be out there so much more often. But because it's very difficult to get out there, and because my mobility is screwed, I can, just to remind people, I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis, and I may look very, mobile from the waist upwards, like, hey, look at me, I'm just normal. I can speak vaguely normally. I do get my
from the
words
waist upwards. He is an athletic Adonis of
just this body is a temple. Just under here, it's more like just basement dweller. Like, yeah, it's not cool. So it means that getting to Ukraine is very laborious and difficult, and actually I need assistance to do that. From, when we went out before, there was 7 of us or something, and you guys were so amazing in helping me get from A to B. And I have to consider that. So it's not so easy for me to just go, I'm going to go to Ukraine, bish bash bosh, couple of days in and a couple of days out, or something like that. It just, everything becomes
there were moments where
more
it was
challenging.
Very difficult for you. I mean, it really was difficult. And
it's that illness that did me. That illness absolutely shafted me. But we'll talk about that. Kevin Forst is such an amazing supporter of the channel. Thank you very much. Julian Rossiter, I think it would be sensible for Europe to strengthen ties with Turkey. Now, this is interesting. There's been talk about this because Turkey have been straddling that fence, haven't they, with a foot in both sides, in both gardens. But actually, I think they are incredibly useful. They're useful. The reason why they're in NATO is because of the Black Sea and the Bosphorus Straits, and they get to close that due to the Montreux Convention. And that is incredibly important. But Turkey is also probably the most geographically important nation on earth because it straddles north and south. It is the crossroads of north and south, east and west, Islam and Christianity, secularism and religion, democracy and theocracy. And so it's there geographically and ideologically right in the middle. And the question for NATO, and some people are saying, we should kick Turkey out, like we should kick Hungary out. No. The problem is, if you do that, then it's a zero-sum game. So you give them to the other side. So the reason why Turkey's in NATO is because of all the aforementioned ideas, but primarily because that if we don't have them, Russia will. Right. And so we need them on our side because otherwise they're on their side. So NATO is superbly important. And I think they are going to be very important in any peace deals. If I was Zelensky, I think Istanbul has already become quite a key place for peace talks. And I think for good reason, because they genuinely do kind of sit on both sides there. Whereas if say, Hungary was the place, or China was a place, then I don't think you're going to get fairness at all. So but anyway, I didn't let Julian finish. We would have to give concessions. So they are strategically positioned to have very large military. We would have to give concessions, but probably worth it given the stark alternatives. So we are seeing that. So what has happened recently, Julian, is that the Americans have finally allowed F-16s to go to Turkey, and I think there's even talk about the F-35s. And you've also seen Germany allow Eurofighter Typhoons to go to Turkey. So that is literally happening. It would be sensible for Europe. We are giving Eurofighter or selling Eurofighter Typhoons to Turkey is an absolute sign that we are strengthening ties with Turkey, and it will be for those kind of strategic reasons. Putin Puppet says it's Trump, Putin, Kim, Xi against Ukraine and so Europe. It perfectly fits in with one world, three empires doctrine. NATO Article 5 is dead. The situation might be worse than before World War II. I mean, that's fairly doom and gloom, but it definitely does look like the US sees that as well. Maybe not Trump himself, but the people around him see Europe as a place to be carved up between Russia and China and the US, but maybe actually the US leaving Europe to those other larger empires. But yeah, Article 5, that's what NATO, that NATO summit was all about. Is Article 5 dead? Is NATO dead? And there were good signs that it wasn't, and Trump was definitely on side. But the problem is with Trump, he has his recency bias, gets back to the US, gets poisoned by all of these ideas, and then comes up. He won't push back about weapons not going to Ukraine. Like
No.
he doesn't have those big ideas like that. He's not an ideas man, Trump. He just isn't. He's not knowledgeable enough. Whereas there was Biden apparently was the one that so it turned out was the one that said no to ATACMS when I was claiming it was going to be Jake Sullivan and people like that. But there were rumors that came out that it was actually Biden that said no to that. Yeah. Now that was bad. I disagree with that decision. But what you're seeing is a president that actually has some individual thoughts, some independent thought there. I don't think you get that from Trump. I think whatever freaking Elbridge Colby tells him, that's what he'll do.
And this is the argument that was made to me, is like, we are beating up on Sullivan, and absolutely right, because he thinks like a bean counter, he thinks like a manager. But someone said, look, Sullivan is articulating what he thinks Biden wants to hear. He is creating a policy framework, trying to imagine what Biden would do if he was across the details. So I think, it's not a good critique of Biden to think of him as like the good czar who's being foiled by his minions. Now his minions are trying to put into practice the policy that they think he wants enacted. So I think that's very important what you just said there.
Yeah. Thank you very much to Putin Puppet for that. Just a few more here. BME, Ukrainian Wine Fund. Thank you very much, Slava Ukraini, my friend. Really kind. And F. Oint from Hungary. Both Putin and Trump need to be politically isolated. Absolutely. Mark, I've been thinking about you recently, Mark. So my intention, Mark, today was to do my next video, which is long overdue, for my original trip to Ukraine. It was last freaking February, not February this year, but last February. And I'm doing my Kherson bit, which is where I go and meet Olena, who's Mark's wife's parents, in Sinarivka, which is near Kherson. And I'm so insanely busy every day. Like literally, I know I keep saying this, but I really am. And I was setting that aside to do today, to start again doing. I've done a little bit of it. And then Caelan Robertson, I'm now interviewing him at 5 o'clock. He's just contacted me.
Oh, it's 5 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah, so UK time. And then you contacted me, and I'm like, okay, there goes my intentions of doing that. It's like, should we do a live? Okay. Caelan Robertson, yeah, I'll jump on. So Mark, I honestly, I promise I'm going to get to that video, because I owe it to your parents, just to include them in the YouTube video. Well, not your parents, your in-laws. One of the most enraging comments from Washington, among many, is that there is no military solution to this war. It's cowardly and plays right into Putin's plans. Well, what's funny about that, Mark, is that actually that's not quite correct. At least we're hearing that from a number of people, but is it Grinkovich, who is going to be the American general in charge of the SACEUR, in charge of the NATO forces in Europe? So the European NATO forces always have an American commander. There was a rumor that they were going to pull out of Europe to the point where they wouldn't have an American NATO commander in Europe, but they've decided to keep that. And he is on record saying there is a solution, that Ukraine can win. Yet that goes against literally what Friedrich Merz has said, but also what we're hearing from Rubio and JD Vance, who are both very clearly on record saying, I think both of them have said that you're not going to win a war militarily. So there seems to be confusion there. But I think generally speaking, the American position is what you say, Mark. And thank you very much, by the way. Any position on how Ukraine prevails in this, Jonathan?
I think it's going to be a mixture. And I think this is reflected in the Ukrainian policy. One is they cannot be entirely dependent on sticking it out in the war on foreign partners, whether those partners are well-meaning, whether they're actually effective like Denmark, or whether they're frankly, with friends like these who need enemies when it comes to the US. Ukraine decided quite some time ago that they're going to have to be able to be self-sufficient in some respects, or they will never even survive, let alone win. So that's the first thing. I think the second one, they've also decided that this is going to be won through asymmetric means. And those asymmetric means have to have a strategic purpose. One of those strategic purposes is to interrupt and disrupt Russian logistics, Russian production, and its entire military industrial logistics and manufacturing capacity. The other one is the Russian economy, that essentially it's going to be the weakness in Russia's ability to supply the war and service the war and get new recruits is going to be a key break point for the regime. So again, Ukraine is doing what it can to attrit the Russian economy, not just on the battlefield, but in other ways as well. This is one for us to maybe tackle on a different episode. Several Grey Fleet tankers have mysteriously had explosions in their engine rooms over the last few months. What a curious coincidence. So I think there's a strategic purpose here. Attrit Russia on the front, attrit Russian logistics, and attrit the Russian economy. Now, if only Western allies could get on board with a few of those, we could attrit their Russian military capacity by preventing opponents getting through, and we could stop the Russian economy from surviving in its current capacity or ability to service the war, and we could ensure that Ukraine has the economic capacity to scale up its production. We don't have to have boots on the ground. We just need to be a bit smarter and have a bit more will to align with what I think is a clear winning strategy. Because once Russia can no longer prosecute the war, they may well experience a collapse, as the Tsarist forces in 1917 experienced, where it looks like they're invincible until they're not. It looks like they're inevitable and eternal until bang, overnight they're done and have to withdraw. And then a year later, we saw the German forces experience the same thing, where their economy was no longer able to keep the front going. And once that implosion happens, Ukraine is getting all of its sovereign territory back, all of it. So we need to get on board with that program.
One of my favorite comments here from Scruffy Tales, The Warzone. Everyone should go and subscribe to his channel. He's great at mapping, and he's got a growing channel, and it's really cool. But Scruffy says, give Ukraine 14 Gripen and 6 F-35 and see if there is military solution. Now, what's interesting is that from a military point of view, Ukraine appears to be getting somewhat of a parity, or at least wresting back some of the air advantage that the Russians have had close to the front line. So they are using guided glide bombs far more frequently. At least there's more published content. I presume that means that they are indeed using guided glide bombs much more often, and they are taking out drone operator units with these guided glide bombs, as well as HQs and all sorts. They're really effective usage of these, which means that they are able to get closer to the front lines. There's been a massive degradation of Russian air defenses over time. We've now seen what are called Beaver drones, these Boba drones, which would used to be used for these long-range one-way attack drone strikes on, say, Russian oil depots. They've now been fitted with thermal imaging and first-person view cameras and used to blow up radars and air defense units on Crimea and stuff. So you're starting to see, I think, well, I'm wondering whether there will be a point soon where Ukraine can start bringing their air assets further forward.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Close their support and start making strikes, and that would be brilliant. And then, you know, if they had Gripens with the Meteor missiles on board, if they had F-35s, of course, then there's all sorts of options there. But you know, Gripens are perfectly doable. It's just a will. It's just a will to make that happen. Saab have been up for it, I think, as far as I can work out. In fact, they've even given a military aid package where they've Sweden have secured spare parts and training and whatnot on for the Gripen, even though they aren't providing Gripen. So it's something that will happen. It just needs to bloody happen now. It doesn't take a lot of people. I keep talking about how, so it's just metal, right? It's just stuff. But I would, if you're losing a unit of people, like, I don't know, Ukraine is on the defensive or goes on attack and they lose a couple of hundred people in that attack, right? That's a couple of hundred people. But when you lose an F-16 and a pilot, that is just one person. And we always go, that is absolutely freaking terrible. But from a purely human point of view, it is not that bad. We think that the loss of airplanes are just terrible, terrible, terrible. My opinion is train up an absolute ton of people. I know you need only certain people, and you need to have skills and whatever. I'm not denigrating that, but just get as many people as you can trained up to be pilots and get just more planes, Gripens, F-16s, anything you can get your hand on. And then because if you lose these planes, they are just bits of metal and you're only losing one person in each. And it's not, rather than losing 1,000 people or whatever in these bigger maneuvers. I just have this view that there needs to be much more risk taking with planes. But in order to be risk taking with the planes, high risk, high reward, you need to have a decent supply of them, and they clearly don't. But I'd love to see a really decent supply of planes. This is stuff I dream of as I go to sleep every night. So yeah.
And we do have to remember, though, that these pilots have huge investment in them. If you compare them to the cost of training up an infantryman, it's dramatically more, and of course it takes a long time. So they are in very finite supply.
Yeah, that is just money. My point about the plane thing is just a hunk of metal. It's an expensive hunk of metal, but it's money, and the training and the time is just money. Right, and if
in the ideal scenario, the pilot ejects and survives. So that in that scenario, But I would say the individual pilots, they're a scarce resource. In fact, they're more precious in some ways than the planes, because if the guy can survive, then you can stick him in another plane and off we go again, and they've got more experience. But when you lose a pilot, as Ukraine did this week, they lost one of the most experienced. That's not just a human tragedy. That is a major strategic loss.
Which is why, absolutely. Which is why 2.5 years ago, there should have just been just train, pilot.
Yes.
Just loads of pilots. Just get them, and because actually, when you say that's a cost, there are costs involved, like fuel costs and whatnot. But training isn't as costly as building stuff, I don't think. I'm probably over speculating here, and none of this is my sphere of expertise, but you might say if we were to buy in a pilot, if we were to train a pilot from, I don't know, from another country, so we're going to take in a Hungarian pilot to train them in the UK, then we are going to charge Hungary this much money to train them. But I wonder what the actual cost of training a pilot is. There's going to be time
millions of dollars.
But the actual cost, you've got the time
millions of dollars. It's a huge chunk of money.
Yes, it's not cheap, but it's also it is just money, and I know money is doesn't grow on trees. But my point is, rather than build and give to Ukraine 100 tanks, I'd just be pilots.
I agree with you. And if we'd scale this up properly with foresight and vision, we'd have created a pipeline of these, as you say, training schools and facilities. And that's why I think the news, I don't know if you spotted it last week, that came through, that an absolute ton of F-16s that are basically reaching the end of their life are being handed over to Romania, I think it was. And people going, oh, why don't they give them to Ukraine? They missed the point. Apparently, these planes have very little in the way of avionics and modern equipment. They're basically shells that are about to be retired. But in these quantities, you can train a lot of pilots up. Yeah. So I think, people missed the point of that actually this is a really smart move.
Yeah.
But 3 years into the goddamn war, I mean, why can't they do it sooner?
So just to finish up here, who's popping? Do we think the CSTO will survive as things are? So this is kind of like sort of NATO equivalent in the Caucasus Eurasian sort of area. Yeah, it's going to be under pressure with Azerbaijan, Armenia, even if Kazakhstan are feeling a little bit independent. Then yeah, that'd be lovely if that could fall apart. Dr. Andy, would you acknowledge the fact that Trump pushed the Europeans to spend so much more money for defense, and it might be an advantage to have one Western politician who is accepted by Putin? Advantage? So a great question there. The first one is not really. So let me just explain. So Trump will take the plaudits for getting NATO to spend more. But when you look at when he put pressure on, and that had been going on prior to Trump, right? So Obama in 2014 gave the 2% thing, but that had been previously being, that was itself based on previous thinking and pressure to get Europe to spend more. So 2014, Obama 2%, and then that had an effect. And then 2017, 18 NATO summit, 17, I think, Trump goes and he kicks off and then says, you know, NATO isn't spending enough, or other allies outside the US isn't spending enough. And then NATO placated him, the rest of the countries, with some concessions, saying we're going to spend a bit more. It didn't really massively change it. What changed NATO spending more was war in Ukraine. It's that simple, right? The 2022 onwards, that's when the European and Canadians and others started spending an absolute ton of money on defense. Trump will take the plaudits for that. And indeed, that's kind of what happened at the last NATO summit, where Mark Rutte and others knew very well that Trump is supremely narcissistic. And so they played to his ego by saying, yeah, it was up, look at what you've done. We're all now spending up to 5%. Now, actually, the 5% thing, you could put down to Trump pushing that. But the general expenditure that has been moving towards above 2%, for some nations well above 3%, that is the war in Ukraine. That is what has expedited the change there, and it isn't Trump. But if you want to let Trump think it's him, then that's fine, because if that gets him on side, and I think that's what happened at NATO summit, is they butter him up because that's how you get him on side. At least that was the intention. Whether it's going to change, I don't know. Now, he's accepted by Putin. He's not accepted by Putin. He's manipulated by Putin. So yeah, Trump might think he's like, he keeps saying, oh, I've got a great relationship. He really respects me, Kim and Xi Jinping and Trump. They really respect me. We weren't respected as a nation before, but we're respected now. You can translate that into reality as being, all of these people know how to manipulate Trump, and he is eminently vulnerable to manipulation. So is that an advantage? No, I think it makes the US more susceptible to doing what they're doing right now, which is not helping Ukraine. So interesting questions. I would just not agree that's the situation. But thank you, Dr. Andy, on behalf of Jonathan Fink, because that's your super chat there.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I couldn't put it better than that. I feel that the topics we've discussed today not only are incredibly important to jump on top of those and try and put a sort of reality check against them, especially the clear alignment, which hasn't just come out of the blue, but the clear alignment between US policy and Russian aspiration. It's now just the mask is slipping, that's all. But it's been apparent, the signs have been there to be read for a long, long time. And they're not incompatible with Trump one.
I can't hear you at all. I don't know if anyone else can't hear you. I can't hear you. I don't know if that's me. I don't know if something's gone funky with me. It'd be interesting. Oh no, you've come back there. Now you've come back.
There. Oh, my brilliant speech was lost to the world.
It was lost.
No, I mean, as I say, the key thing out of this episode, and we're going to be following up on this because it's not the last we've heard of it. You've got the clear alignment of US policy with Russian aspiration, and that is for the erasure of Ukraine as the way to achieve so-called peace and to get to the sort of minerals and money making that clearly obsesses this transactional administration. And we've seen the mask slip, but this hasn't come out of the blue. We've seen the signs and tendencies of this for many, many months, and indeed prior to Trump's election as well. And unfortunately, I think we just have to face the reality and plan accordingly. If Europe is going to seek consensus with the US, then not only is that going to be detrimental for Ukraine, then that is going to be seriously dangerous for Europe. As I've said all along, Putin only has one gear, and it's escalation. He is going to escalate until Russia flies apart, implodes, and someone takes him out into the courtyard of the Kremlin and puts a bullet through his forehead or strings him up. He's going to carry on until that happens, right? So we better damn well, orientate ourselves to that.
He only has one gear, and it's the next one up. Richard Bennett. Gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you very much, my man. David Sharp, with the withdrawal of US support, will Europe finally give Ukraine what they need financially and militarily to beat Russia? Hopefully, but the problem with Europe is that, and you can include the UK here, is that it all costs money, and you're having to fight with domestic issues. And so we've, in the UK, for example, at the moment, we're having an absolute nightmare with our welfare system costing too much money. And so the Labour government has been going through these reforms that have been really unpopular because we are an outlier in Europe in that after COVID, loads of our workforce didn't go back to work. We are a massive outlier, and our welfare system, weirdly, is costing us much more than it is in Europe. So something about the UK needs to be changed. There's some reform needs to happen. So this is a real prickly thought, bush to grasp, a nettle to grasp. And the Labour government's done this, but then you've got the people on the right, like Reform and the Tories, have been calling for this reform for years. The Tories didn't do it. Now Labour have come in and actually doing it. They are saying, oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. It's like, hang on, this is what you've asked for. And then the people on the left are like, you can't do this. What about the disabled people and blah, 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 blah. And it's just really freaking difficult. But what I'm trying to say is that that's what's going on domestically. And the Labour government, for example, but any government in Europe or Canada or wherever, is going to be saying, right, we've got all these issues. We've got no money. Like the UK has run out of money. There's a massive black hole that was left by the last government. 14 years, COVID, black hole. And they're like, right, we've got to solve all these things in a 4-year time period. Meanwhile, Ukraine is getting battered, and we understand that we need to support Ukraine as much as possible. We know that. Like, Keir Starmer knows it. Like Friedrich Merz knows it. But it's like, how much money do we give to Ukraine? Because if we give too much, we will get voted out in the next election because we haven't done enough about education. We haven't done enough about so on and so forth. And so you've got right-wing populism talking about immigration bubbling away at the side. And it's just a nightmare. So, we really need to support Ukraine. We can do it. Will we do it? Like, we have the ability to do it, but you are going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that's why the Europeans in the EU have got a slightly better situation with the Rearm Europe, or the Readiness Europe, as it's now, Readiness 2030, but that's borrowing money. Like, you're going to be borrowing at preferential rates using the EU, blah, blah, blah. You are going to be racking up your own sort of debts in order to help Ukraine, but also to rearm yourself. So it's really difficult. Like, I would love Ukraine to get all the assistance they can possibly get. But the reality is, if you're a political party in charge, that may well hurt your re-election chances because you want to be buttering up your own voters so they vote you back in. That's the reality of the situation, and it sucks.
And
which is why it comes back.
It's a chicken and egg, isn't it? If you don't have a grown-up conversation with your electorate, they will punish you when you take those decisions if they don't know the context and the background. So again, it's not the politicians are helpless in this, but they do need to put real hard work into the education of electorates.
That's a really, really valid point. And this is where the Americans, this is why I'm always freaking talking about the US. It's because they have that kit. They've got a desert yards of like 4,000 Bradleys sitting there. Like, they can help. They have the capacity to help more than any other nation. And that's why, you know, it shouldn't have to be the US helping, of course, but the situation is that they are in a position to be able to help the most, and that's why it's frustrating that they are deciding not to.
And it's not that this stuff's being stockpiled for strategic reasons. These are end-of-life vehicles that are going to be sitting in the desert until at some point they're scrapped. They're getting progressively, one would imagine, you know, mechanically more decrepit. This isn't. You can't apply the same excuse that they're using with air defense. They need to stockpile it for deterrence. No, this stuff is end-of-life kit, which, you know, even if, you know, 1 in 3 vehicles is serviceable and you hand them all over, Ukrainians would find a way to cannibalize the rest to create an extraordinary capability. So this is, let's look at it what it is. The very best case scenario you could say is that it's just sheer lack of imagination and bureaucratic inertia. The worst case scenario is they do not want Ukraine to win or survive. That you have to come to those conclusions.
Yeah, and yeah, appeasing an imperialistic dictator never worked, so it won't work on Trump either. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, agree with that. And thank you, F-Oink. Really appreciate your support. So there we are. I've been angry today, and I will continue, no doubt, to be angry because just all the decisions that are coming from the other side of the pond appear to be aimed at hurting Ukraine. And that seems to be unconscionable to me. On the other side of the pond, this side of the pond, we are in a position to be able to help Ukraine, and we are wanting to help Ukraine in the main, but there are problem nations like Slovakia and Hungary getting in the way of that. And we have our own issues to deal with as well that mitigates against that aid to Ukraine. So it's frustrating. And meanwhile, North Korea are happily going to send 30,000 troops, arguably, to help the Russians in a way that no other nation
I would add
at least for Ukraine.
At least 30,000. At least this figure is not going to remain at 30,000. It is going to rise. So we need to act accordingly.
Absolutely. Don't get me started, Karen. EU and all other democratic countries need to get together and tax the digital media companies. That money can be put towards a war effort. Yep, great idea. But the problem is I've just done a massive US politics video. It's about 1 hour and 5 minutes, and it's part 1 of 2. Like, I had to stop because I've only gone through half my things, right? And it's about the bill and connecting that to the ICE stuff as well. And just the video's called the US is punching itself in the face while putting on its jackboots, and I'm really worried about the descent into autocracy and authoritarianism. But the media companies have the US by the testicles, because Jeff Bezos, absolutely stinking rich, brings Venice to a halt, has a $50 million wedding. He's getting a tax cut for him and his sort in the new big beautiful bill. Meanwhile, having paid Trump $40 million through Melania Trump and another $1 million to the inauguration fund to get the US to negotiate on behalf of the digital companies like Peter Thiel's Palantir, like Twitter or X, and all these moguls have gone in, whether it be Sam Altman from OpenAI and so on and so forth, and Google and Tim Cook from Apple. They've given all this money to the Trump administration, and the Trump administration, we've seen this in Canada. They've taken the digital sales tax off the table in Canada, so that's now no longer. It's not even being debated now. That is a success of these companies, and the EU can hold them to account. But we've heard Trump call the EU nasty. They're nasty, nasty, nasty. And so the bone of contention will be the digital companies, the tech companies, and whether the EU can hold them to account, or whether the US will steamroller that attempt, and that becomes the core of the trade deals. And I assume that the EU will probably capitulate, and digital services will not be taxed, and they will have free reign to do what the frick they want and won't be regulated.
Before we jump off, the very final thing here, I know this is a little bit naughty, could we do a plug for my new channel?
Yes.
I've put it in the comments there.
Is
If you're able to
is
bring
it
that up
cat?
onto the screen.
Is it cat videos? What?
Yeah, it is. It's cat. It's puppies and kittens. That's it.
Okay. Let me just bring this up. Are you trying to take over the YouTubing world? Is this what's happening?
No, this is just, and this is, I'll very briefly describe it. I mean, the scenario here is what if politics is demonetized? You know, what if pressure is put on YouTube that you know, anything critical as Donald Trump, for instance, can no longer be monetized? Well, this is one. It's a way of hedging that and doing something that's sort of not related to politics. But also, this is another way of expressing other interests. You know, I'm interested in AI. I'm interested in technology, in futurology, science fiction, and history. And this is a way of sort of blending all these things into together. So it's another little, I'd say, hobby, as it were. But it's one which perhaps has the potential to grow significantly as well.
So you had some videos 2 years ago, a video. So there you go.
Yeah, 2 years ago, and I did not an awful lot with it, but I just recorded a new one. I'm going to do a whole series on AI because I think, as well as what's happening politically, AI is one of the other major existential threats and disruptions to people's lives
Or
and economies.
booms
So,
and
could
solutions.
could be either double-edged sword. So there we go. If people are interested in that, then do jump along and see what's going on there.
Happy days. Well, look, thank you, Jonathan. And to let people know, I'm doing another bleeding live. Kaylin Robertson has contacted me, so it's going to be 5 o'clock, which is like less than 2 hours. So I better sort that out. Have a cup of tea. Say hello to my kids who are like invited other kids around to splash around in our little Bestway pool in the back garden, and they're probably annoying the neighbors. But you know, I'm parenting by YouTube. That's how to do it.
At least they're not stuck in front of a screen. They're out there playing in the physical world.
It's true. It's true. Well, look, mate, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to everyone who so kindly contributed. Really do appreciate it. And please check out my live interview live chat with Elliot Higgins from Bellingcat. That was yesterday. It's on the live tab. That is a really lovely chat. And check out my next one with Kaylin Robertson that's coming soon. And also, obviously, Future Perfect and everything that Jonathan does.
Great speaking. Let's speak again soon.
Yeah. Take care, y'all.